now, listening to the first three speakers, we see how very muddled and complex and difficult these distinctions between animal life, human life, restrictions are. And I would like to emphasize a little bit to think about how fractured everything is by introducing the next speaker. Our next speaker is an artist who's also showing her work here at the Terrestrial Assemblage. Her name is Shira Wachsmann, and she's an artist based between Berlin and London. Welcome. Shira explores the multi-layered meanings of land or matter as a natural and cultural habitat. She mainly uses organic materials such as earth, metal, coal, straw, and plants, and deals with their historical and social content. In her most recent artistic research, she deals with the perspective capacity of memory of matter. When we say memory of matter, we say any matter, which means animal matter, minerals, and so on. Today, she's going to focus on the muddled relationship between the past, the present, and the future, and how the borders and boundaries of matter are fluid and constantly shifting. The moment before an explosion, for example, which can be any changing event in a lifetime, is a term Wachsmann coined in order to work with time, trauma, and event in a different way than the linear time events we normally use. The moment can be rather seen as a fragment, a diffraction, and the becoming of the unfolding event. I'm very happy to welcome you, Shira, here on site.
Thank you. I just want to see that my presentation is working.
Yeah, let's see first if the presentation is gonna come up. That looks good.
Yeah.
I don't know if you hear that actually, but we have very loud birds going from one area to another here. The weather is changing between like slightly raining and wind. It's very it's interesting to be here outside next to what's happening.
And freezing, I have to say.
Do you want to take my micro? I think it's working better. Yeah. Shira Wachsmann.
Thank you. Okay, I'm starting my presentation. So I wrote this text in the wake of the event in the past week between Israel and Palestine and in the general associating silencing atmosphere in Germany. That's why I've decided to focus my presentation today on trauma, boundaries, and the creation of shape and identity, and the reconfiguring of matter, or what I call the remembering through art practice, rather on memory in plants and plants reaction, which is also something that I'm working on. Nevertheless, in this lecture, I'm not referring only to the encounter between human and themselves, but also to the encounter between human and other entities, or to everything that is in motion in this world. In this context, I will also talk about a different time concept that I've developed in connection with my artistic practice, and I hope that by the end of the presentation, things will come together and make some sense. So the title of my presentation today, which is also the title of my research, The Moment Before the Explosion, War Trauma, Embodiment, and the Remembering of Matter, and What Matters. My research takes as a starting point that trauma is a living entity, and war trauma, and possibly all trauma, can be seen as a particular set of scars, shaped by memory, fear, identity, and politics. A repositioning of those scars can reveal not only how their intensity is operating in the discourse, but also shed light on how the mechanism of creating knowledge, identity, and meaning are formed. I'm showing a video that will run while I'm talking and illustrate what I'm speaking about. My works, and in particular my last video works, explore the unspoken zone where memory, amnesia, and trauma of war are embodied and preserved and circulated in the Palestinian-Israeli cactus called sabra, which historically demarcate the boundaries of Palestinian villages and remain a living testament in the landscape of life lived before 1948. The sabra, or in its botanical name, Opuntia ficus indica, originates in Mexico and arrived with the Spanish to the Middle East in the 1600s. Until today, it is still unclear if this specific cactus is a man-made assembly from two other cacti or a self-evolution of the cactus itself. Those challenging the accepted dichotomy and binary thoughts of the clear division between culture and nature and the way it has been used to push forward certain agendas. The change of climate from the Mexican to the Middle Eastern weather allowed the sabra to spread only with human cultivation or when branches accidentally fall to the ground and take root. This quality makes them perfect as a fence or territorial markers, practice which was used by the Palestinians and did not change after the British Empire occupied Ottoman Palestine during the First World War. The War of 1948 and its aftermath, however, marked a dramatic change in the social and cultural role of the cacti in the landscape. Israel appropriated the cacti as a symbol of its people, which ultimately led to the popularization of the term sabra, once the word for cactus, now also referring to an Israeli-born Jew. During the war, the Palestinian villages were destroyed and the residents were exiled, marking the first stage of this metamorphosis from a Palestinian territorial marker to a symbol of recognition for Israel. In 2005, the term sabra morphed itself once again, but this time into a tank, namely the Sabra M60T main battle tank of the Israeli forces, thus continuing its transformation from a border mark and a symbol of defense to an attacker and an occupier. I'm looking at the role of the cactus, specifically as a body of a fence, a body that contains a cultural narrative, a collective body of memory and trauma, as a worker and a soldier, and as a body that can be killed. The sabra is an event that unfolds in different directions, taking on different shape, meaning, and time period. My research and the artistic practice that accompanies it focus on the role of trauma and how it is played out through three main protagonists or entities: the cactus, human, and the tank, that are haunted by the explosion in some way or another. The explosion, or trauma, creates two halves and a void. Before the explosion, after the explosion, before the trauma, and after the trauma, and the attraction tension between them. The effect of trauma is the opposite of linear time. The past is projected into the future, coming back to create a segment or the present, creating a fluid environment that allows the living trauma to take shape and circulate. I'm looking at the moment before, which is a term that emerged from my practice and came into my theory, in order to work time, trauma, and event in different ways than the linear time event we normally use. I'm looking at the moment before the explosion as simultaneously a fragment in space and time and a wave that diffracts and becomes the unfolding event. As we can see in this diagram of time I made, time is much more dimensional than linear, and the present depends on the way we will remember the always active past and future, which are entangled and inseparable. The moment before can also be seen as an apparatus. When I speak about apparatus, I'm referring to two notions of the apparatus, to the Foucauldian apparatus, or to the Lyotard notion of dispositive, which indicate the various institutional, physical, and administrative mechanisms and knowledge structure which maintain the exercise of power within a social body and the discourse. And to current Barad notion of the apparatus, which are specific material that not only emerge in time, but can reconfigure memory and time matter as part of the ongoing becoming of the world. The apparatus, or the moment before, is not an instrument of passive observation, but is part of shaping the shape of the discourse on reality. The moment before is a material discursive practice. When I speak about discourse, I'm not referring to a linguistic semiotic practice or something that has been said, but rather to what could have been said, the enabling of something that can be said, or what counts as meaningful and create our reality and way of thinking. Identity secures itself through border, exclusion, aggression, and projection, depending on the psychological need of the body, its political intention, knowledge, and meaning it wishes to create. What other domain, pattern, dimension could we experience if we let the event border, if we let the event shape lose their clear borders, their clear cuts, and clear fixed identity? Identity is the projection of the past onto the idea of the future, or a sense of belonging to a common past. But this perception sees the past as fixed and unable to change. It refuses to see the diffracted wave and pattern of the past that are active in creating the present. It reduces complexity to an expected pattern of behavior that will fit the frame of taxonomy and connect a social body that has lost its sense of solidarity and the feeling of responsibility, or as Karen Barad put it, the ability to respond. Things receive meaning by how they are being connected, remembered, and represented, and by whom. Meaning is established through connection of aesthetic, by the language that is used to talk about things, the memory, story, and narrative that are being told about them, the emotion associated with them, the feeling that they evoke, the way we use them, how they are interpreted, classified, conceptualized, and the atmosphere it creates. All of this is based on traces and projections that are part of one's culture. When speaking about meaning, we speak about how knowledge regulates and organizes our way of thinking, behaving, and acting. Meaning is inseparable from how culture is used to mark and maintain identity and difference between groups. In the two videos that were created parallel to the theoretical research I'm doing, the interview is used as a linguistic act that expresses a specific narrative. The battle is always over the narrative that constantly brings forth the voice of the hegemonic patriarchal narrative that tries to fix borders and identity, hiding behind the sense of stability, comfort, and security in the known shape of things and common sense as reality that it wishes to maintain. The video that is presented in this exhibition and my other video, which is an interview with a tank, deal with the matter of the moment before the explosion. Through the video, I'm trying to understand what is the moment before the explosion, what it is made from, what does it consist of, its colors, sounds, rhythm, sensation, and the creation of atmosphere, shape, and boundaries. It is not easy to capture this moment, as often it is easier to recognize it in a retrospective. But if we look at the moment before, also as an apparatus that set each time a segment that diffracts and creates reality, we can try to walk the moment before, not as only leading to the explosion, but also as something that has the ability to change the event, change the way the event or trauma unfolds, circulates or breaks the circulation by understanding its shape and how a shape is created and the effect of this shape in and on the world. The moment before enabled the trauma to take shape and appear to us in space and time. In the video work A Dream, which is a dialogue with a cactus that I brought from Italy to an experiment in the RCA sound studio, in this experiment, I tested the reaction of the cactus to the sound of an explosion. I played a very loud explosion sound to the cactus while simultaneously recording the wave it emitted with a special ultrasonic microphone. My aim was to see if there is a change in its wave before and after the explosion. Before I started with the experiment, I recorded an interview with it. In the interview, I told it what we were going to do, and I also shared my doubts about it. I wanted to see if I could communicate with the sabra, start a dialogue with it, and what it would mean to have a dialogue with a cactus. The video is an attempt to create an impossible dialogue with the cactus. It's an attempt to go outside the dimension of the familiar or the seen reality that is known to us through our senses. In an absurd and humoristic act that tries to sit with the trauma and its aggressiveness in the same space. It is not about trying to work out the trauma in a practice of a psychoanalytic conversation, but rather giving it a space to present itself, to create a certain sensual space and atmosphere in a discourse that tries to silence it. The video is a poetic act that attempts to work out different traumas of war of different generations and entities that share history. Although some of these entities in the video didn't physically experience some of the events, they still embody the memory and traces of those events. The work also explored the idea of putting something in a sterile room or laboratory that is completely separate from its surrounding, its trace and shape that make it, in an attempt to obtain an objective result that stands for itself. The video questioned the existence of a sterile space as an empty page, tabula rasa, which has no trace of trauma and time that influence it, or is embodied in the language and matter which are already active in the encounter that creates it. In the video, I'm looking at the moment before in order to understand how it serves as a surface, or ground zero, that enables the trauma to take hold, and is inseparable from our experience. How the past is projected into the future, returning to create the now, solidifying the trauma, situating it, and letting it dwell and recirculate. Human and non-human matter is memory that diffracts and creates the world. The raw memory that life has encoded in material that creates the present and future meaning. Ultrasonic wave cannot be heard by human ear, but we can see their visual representation and the change in them. I place the blue sound wave of my voice and the red ultrasonic wave of the cactus on top of each other, in order to create a visual dialogue, a landscape of a dialogue that interact in the moment before the explosion. An existence in which the two waves matter and create a different reality. The two events are placed together, so both voices can be heard, and neither one of them is pushed into the realm of the invisible. The three protagonists, the cacti, the human, and the tongue, are haunted by the explosion in some way or another, and are part of this overall fluid environment that creates this kind of weird shape-shifting that I'm looking at, in order to understand and shed light on how trauma develops, diffract, is shaped, and creates our reality. The encounter in my work is not of meeting the sabra or the tank, but the act of materiality itself is the encounter. A multi-directional encounter that enables engagement with the trauma and the discourse that allow it to enter our ability to grasp it. In order to understand the trauma, or try to work out the trauma, we need to understand and recognize the shape of trauma, pattern, and the effect it creates. Without doing so, one can recognize and fight the mechanism at play which try to silence the trauma and stop it from flowing and entering into a certain shape that will enable it to become present in the discourse. The moment before leads to a certain discourse and is the discourse itself that can be remembered in different ways. Art or a poetic act is an encounter that has the ability to do so. That is why often art is the first to be targeted or attacked. Art can allow the energy to go into different shapes and bring the unseen shape into visibility. Energy is not committed to a specific shape and can flow in and out of shape, shape-shift form and pattern, and by doing so, it can subvert under the hegemonic linguistic narrative that might not even recognize it as such, as sometimes it had no presence in the commonly known discourse up to that point. The silence energy, or the silence trauma, create an encounter between the verbal and the non-verbal language. This encounter creates space that exposes the seam of the symbolic order and power structure. This moment creates an opportunity, a space for the remembering to take place. The possibility of a remembering of matter, of past and future, through art, into a new shape, a new dimension, that can come to present and take space in the discourse, that will have the ability to affect and maybe even change the discourse, even if only in tiny bits, and allow us to sit with the trauma in the same space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shira. I would already like very much to get into a discussion, because we had a beautiful talk already about this linguistic trouble that we have by naming different complexes, and how, for example, a sabra can first be a name for a cacti and then easily change to a tank, but it converts directly any kind of meaning that we relate to it when these names change. I'm going to keep it for the Q&A later.